He didn't scream when the devil appeared. That was the part nobody would have believed. No trembling. No running. No desperate prayer whispered into the cold night air. Just a man standing inside a circle of ash and ancient symbols, breathing slowly, hands steady, eyes open, staring at something that should not exist. And across from him, bound by forces older than language itself. The devil. Trapped. Contained. Defeated. Or at least, that is what Elias believed. For exactly 43 seconds. Because then, without warning, without reason, without a single trace of fear, the devil smiled. Not the smile of something in pain. Not the grimace of something resisting. But the slow, calm, deeply unsettling smile of someone who had just watched the last piece of a very long game finally fall into place. And in that moment, the cold that crept up Elias's spine had nothing to do with the night air. It had everything to do with the sudden, horrible thought blooming quietly in the back of his mind, the thought he did not want to finish, the thought that whispered. What if I am not the one who won tonight? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here, click on the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. We drop new ones every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Because to understand that night, to truly understand what happened in that forest, you have to understand Elias. Not as a myth. Not as a cautionary tale. But as a man. A real, breathing, achingly human man who wanted one thing more than he wanted safety, more than he wanted peace, more than he wanted anything the ordinary world could offer him. He wanted truth. Elias had grown up in a small town pressed against the edge of a dense, ancient forest, the kind of town where old women locked their doors before sunset and children were taught not to speak certain names aloud after dark. Not because of superstition. But because in that town, the old stories had a habit of proving themselves true in ways that left scars. His mother had been a quiet woman with careful eyes. She never explained why she placed dried herbs above every doorway. She never said why she refused to let Elias sleep near the window on certain nights of the year. She simply did these things with the practiced calm of someone who had learned, long ago, that some forces in this world do not care whether you believe in them. Elias had watched her. He had studied her rituals the way other children studied games. And instead of fear, what grew in him was something far more complicated. Fascination. By the time he was 12, he had read every book in the town's small, neglected library. By 15, he was writing letters to scholars in distant cities, asking questions that made them shift uncomfortably in their chairs before writing back cautious, carefully worded replies. By 20, he had left the town entirely, not running from it, but chasing the threat of something he could not name. He enrolled in a university. Studied history. Then theology. Then ancient languages. Then something that had no proper name in the curriculum, something the other students called, the deep reading, the study of texts so old, so obscure, so carefully hidden from mainstream scholarship that most academics refused to acknowledge they existed at all. Elias not only acknowledged them. He devoted his life to them. People thought he was searching for power. That was the assumption. The quiet, intense scholar who reads forbidden texts must want something dark for himself. But that was never it. Elias had no hunger for control, no desire for wealth, no interest in the games people play with influence and dominance. He simply could not stand not knowing. The not knowing was a physical thing for him. A pressure behind his eyes. A tension that never fully left his shoulders. The world was full of stories that the educated classes called mythology and the fearful classes called religion and the wise classes said nothing about at all, and somewhere inside all of those stories, Elias was certain, was a root. A truth. A reality that had been dressed in metaphor and legend to make it bearable for ordinary minds. He wanted the thing beneath the metaphor. He wanted to see what was actually there. And it was this hunger, this relentless, consuming, deeply personal hunger, that eventually led him to the story that would change everything. He found it in a private collection, in a city he had traveled 3 weeks to reach. The text was written in a language that was mostly dead, and the passage that stopped him cold was one that most scholars had translated loosely as a moral fable, a simple warning about the dangers of pride. Elias read it more carefully. And what he found was not a fable. It was an account. A record. Written by someone who claimed to have encountered a particular kind of entity, not a beast, not a demon in the conventional sense, but something described only as a collector. Something ancient that did not destroy the people it encountered. Something that did not steal from them or harm them in ways they could name. Something that simply waited. It waited until a person opened a door they did not fully understand. Not through naivety. Not through weakness. But through the very best of themselves, through curiosity, through seeking, through the desire to understand what lies beyond the visible world. And once that door was opened, once that particular and rare kind of invitation was extended, the entity crossed a threshold that, according to the text, it could not cross any other way. Because it needed a willing soul. Not coerced. Not tricked in the conventional sense. Willing. Elias sat with that word for a long time. Willing. He should have been frightened. Any reasonable person would have closed the book, returned it to its shelf, and gone home to a warm meal and a locked door and the sensible comfort of not pursuing things that had no good ending. Elias read the passage again. And then he began taking notes. The months that followed were not dramatic. That was what no one would understand later, in the retelling, how unglamorous the obsession actually looked from the outside. It looked like a man at a desk. It looked like stacks of paper and empty cups and eyes that had forgotten what a full night of sleep felt like. It looked like cancelled dinners and unreturned letters and a cat that eventually stopped waiting by the door because it understood before Elias did that he had already, in every meaningful sense, left. But inside, it was a fire. Because the deeper he read, the more certain he became that this was not mythology. The entity described in that first text appeared, under different names and in different forms, in manuscripts separated by centuries and continents. Always the same essential nature. Always the same method. Always the same hunger for the same specific thing. A human soul that came to it freely. And buried in one manuscript, a brutally difficult text written in a dialect of Aramaic that Elias spent 4 months learning just enough of to read, he found something the others did not contain. A counter-ritual. A method not for inviting the entity, but for trapping it. For binding it in a place between arrival and entrance, caught in the act of crossing over, held there by the same symbolic logic it used to draw its willing participants in. Elias read it 17 times before he allowed himself to believe it was real. Then he began to prepare. He found a location. Deep forest. Isolated. Far enough from town that no one would wander into it by accident. He spent 3 weeks memorizing the words of the ritual. The language was not entirely dead, but it was close enough that his pronunciation had to be exact, tested and retested until the syllables felt as natural in his mouth as his own name. He gathered the ash from a fire built according to very specific instructions, using very specific wood, burned at a very specific hour. He drew the symbols with the patience of a man who understood that every line mattered. And then, on a night when the moon sat just past full and the air had the particular quality described in 3 separate manuscripts as the thinning, that atmospheric stillness that seems, if you are sensitive to it, less like weather and more like attention, Elias walked into the forest. He was calm. This surprised him. He had expected fear. He had prepared for it, rehearsed it, built strategies for managing it. But standing at the edge of the circle he had drawn, holding the intention he had carried for 2 years, he felt something far more clarifying than fear. He felt ready. He stepped inside the circle. He began to speak. The words came smoothly. His voice did not waver. The ash glowed faintly at the circle's edge, not brightly, not dramatically, just a quiet luminescence, like something waking slowly from a very long sleep. The temperature dropped. Not gradually. Suddenly. And then the air changed. Not in the way wind changes air. In the way awareness changes a room when someone you didn't know was there suddenly speaks. The forest did not grow louder. It grew more present. More intentional. As if the darkness between the trees had stopped being passive and become something else entirely. Something that had noticed him. Elias kept speaking. The cymbals pulsed once, a single, slow beat, like a heart responding to its own name. And then it appeared. Not from anywhere specific. Not from a portal or a crack in the air or a rush of shadow. It simply became visible, the way something hidden in plain sight suddenly resolves into clarity once you know what you're looking at. A figure. Almost human in shape. Proportioned correctly. Standing completely still in a way that no living creature stands still, no micro-movement, no breath shifting the shoulders, no unconscious weight transfer from foot to foot. Just still. And watching. Its face was difficult to look at directly. Not because it was monstrous, it wasn't. That was the unsettling thing. It was almost entirely unremarkable, almost entirely expressionless, and yet something about the arrangement of its features communicated an intelligence so vast and so old that Elias felt, for just a moment, the specific vertigo of standing at the edge of something with no bottom. He finished the final words. The circle blazed with that quiet golden light, stronger now, steady, humming at a frequency just below sound. The figure stopped. Not because it chose to. Because it couldn't move. Bound. Trapped. And Elias, breathing hard for the first time all night, lowered himself to his knees and let out a breath that carried 2 years of everything inside it. He had done it. Then the devil smiled. If you are still watching up to this point, type "I am still here" in the comments. Let us see who is truly with us till the end of this story. For the first several days, Elias told himself the smile was a performance. A reflex. The last proud gesture of something that had been bested and knew it. He returned to the site each day at dawn and dusk, checking the integrity of the circle, reinforcing the symbols, ensuring nothing had weakened overnight. The devil stood exactly where it had stood on the first night. Watching. On the 4th day, Elias brought a chair. On the 5th, he spoke. "You've been waiting for something," he said. "You expected something different. I understand that. But whatever your intention was, whatever you thought would happen, this is what has actually happened. You are contained. And I intend to learn everything I can from you while you are." The devil's head tilted, very slightly. "You speak," it said, "like someone who believes the experiment is already over." Its voice was not what Elias had prepared for. He had imagined something theatrical, deep, resonant, designed to intimidate. What he heard instead was quiet. Almost gentle. The voice of someone who had no need to impress anyone because they had, long ago, stopped keeping score with other people's reactions. "The experiment," Elias replied carefully, "has produced its result." Has it? A pause. Just long enough to be deliberate. "And what result is that?" "You're here. I'm free. That is the result." The devil looked at him with something that might, in a human face, have been patience. The deep, practiced patience of someone who has watched many versions of this same conversation and knows, with absolute certainty, how each one ends. "Keep believing that," it said. "For now." Elias did not respond. But that night, walking home through the forest, he could not shake the quality of those last 2 words. For now. He returned the next morning. And the morning after that. He began asking questions, careful, structured, the questions of a scholar who has spent his life learning how to extract meaning from resistant sources. He asked about the nature of the entity. About its origins. About the mechanism of what it did and why it did it and what it actually wanted with the souls it collected. And the devil answered. That was the thing that should have frightened him more than anything else. It answered. Clearly and directly and without apparent deception. It described things Elias had theorized but never confirmed. It explained mechanisms that aligned perfectly with things he had read in those obscure manuscripts, too precisely to be invention. It illuminated questions he had carried for years with the casual ease of someone for whom these things are simply common knowledge. He began writing everything down. Filling notebooks. Page after page after page. And somewhere in the middle of that second week, somewhere between a revelation about the structure of conscious intention and a clarification about the nature of what these old texts called soul, Elias stopped noticing that he was tired. He simply forgot. He forgot to eat full meals. He forgot to write letters he had promised to write. He forgot to sleep before the sky had already started to lighten in the east. He forgot the particular quality of the devil's first smile and what it had made him feel, that specific chill, that small dark question mark. He was learning. And learning, for Elias, was the closest thing to pure joy that the world had ever offered him. This was why he didn't notice the change at first. It came slowly. The way a tide comes, not dramatic, not sudden, but incrementally and completely. It began as a kind of looseness in his thoughts. A feeling, late at night, that the sharp edges of his certainties were softening slightly. Not in ways he could name. Just, softer. More open. More willing to entertain questions he would previously have recognized as dangerous and stepped back from carefully. Questions like, what if everything I was taught about this entity is simply fear dressed as fact? What if what it collects is not taken but shared? What if the scholars who wrote those warnings were writing from ignorance, not wisdom? What if knowing something, truly knowing it, requires going further than any boundary says is safe? He did not speak these thoughts aloud. But the devil saw them. He was certain of that later. Because on the night the circle began to fade, not violently, not suddenly, but slowly, like a fire that has burned through all its fuel and is now simply returning to dark, the devil did not look surprised. It looked satisfied. What's happening? Elias's voice came out sharper than he intended. He stepped toward the circle's edge, examining the symbols. They were intact. Every line was where it should be. Nothing had been physically disturbed. But the glow was dimmer. Measurably, undeniably dimmer. It's fading, the devil said simply. That's not possible. The ritual was correct, it said. Completely correct. Every element precisely executed. A pause. That was never the issue. Elias looked up from the symbols. Then what is the issue? The devil studied him for a moment with those ancient, patient eyes. The ritual requires 3 things, it said quietly. You know what they are. The ash. The words. The intent. Yes. A silence. Your intent, the devil said, has changed. The words landed in Elias's chest like something physical. Like a hand pressed flat against a door he had been trying to close. That's not true. Isn't it? I came here to learn. I am still learning. The intent hasn't. You came here, the devil said, and its voice was almost gentle now, to find truth. To face what lies beyond human understanding. That was your intent. Pure. Specific. Entire. A pause. But the intent that lives in you now, the one you have been feeding for the past 2 weeks, is different. Elias felt his jaw tighten. How? You no longer want to understand from outside the door. The devil tilted its head. You want to step through it. Silence filled the forest. The same deep, pressurized silence from that very first night. Elias opened his mouth. Closed it. That is not the same intent, the devil continued, almost apologetically. And the ritual knows the difference. It was built to hold something, but only as long as the one who built the prison still wants to be outside it. Elias shook his head. He felt something cracking inside him, not breaking, not collapsing, but cracking, the way ice cracks when the temperature shifts. I never said I wanted. You didn't have to say it. The words were quiet. Final. The way true things tend to be. Elias stood very still. You placed those books in my path, he said. The realization arrived not as a revelation but as a recognition, the feeling not of learning something new but of finally seeing something that had been in front of him the whole time. The manuscripts. The texts. The ritual itself. The devil said nothing. All of it, Elias continued, and his voice was strange now, not angry, not broken, just hollow in the particular way of a man realizing the foundations of the last decade of his life have been something other than what he thought. Every discovery. Every lead. Every piece of the path. I have been waiting, the devil said finally, for a very long time. For someone who would not be stopped by fear. Someone whose love of truth was larger than their instinct for self-preservation. It paused. Do you understand how rare that is? Elias laughed. It came out wrong, too thin, too short, the laugh of a man who has found something technically funny at the worst possible moment. You needed someone who would willingly come close enough. Yes. Because you cannot enter a willing soul by force. No. Only by invitation. Yes. The circle was nearly dark now. Just the faintest trace of luminescence remaining at the edges, barely enough to see. Elias dropped to his knees. Not in surrender, in exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that arrives when a person finally stops running from the thing they have been running from and simply, finally, stops. Can I stop this? He asked. The devil watched him. Its expression, for the first time since that first night, held no smile. No amusement. No satisfaction. Just something that might, if you were generous with your interpretation, be called honesty. Yes, it said. Elias looked up. How? Leave. Walk away from the circle. Walk away from this forest. Return to a life built on different questions. Smaller questions. Safer ones. A pause. The intent that is now in you, I cannot force it to grow. You would have to starve it deliberately. Every day. For the rest of your life. Another pause. It would be very difficult. You would always know that you walked away from the answer. But it's possible. Yes. Elias exhaled. But you said I won't. The devil was quiet for a moment. I said you won't, it confirmed. Not because you are weak. Not because you are foolish. Its voice dropped, almost to a register that felt, strange as this was, almost like sympathy. Because you are exactly who you have always been. And what you have always been is someone who cannot leave the door unopened. Elias looked at the symbols on the ground. At the ash he had gathered so carefully. At the words he had memorized syllable by syllable in a language no longer spoken by the living. He thought about his mother. About the dried herbs above the doorways. About the way she had moved through the world, carefully, quietly, with the deep and practiced calm of someone who had made a choice, long ago, about what kind of doors she would and would not approach. He had never understood that choice. He understood it now. The last light of the circle went out. Not with a sound. Not with a flash. Just, out. Like a candle in a room where someone has finally stopped pretending they want the light on. Elias stayed on his knees for a long time in the dark. And then he made his choice. Not out of weakness. He would want that to be clear, if it could ever be clear to anyone who was not there. Not out of stupidity or blindness or the kind of ordinary human foolishness that leads people off well-marked paths. He made his choice out of the thing that had driven every single day of his life since he had been old enough to understand that the world contained more than it showed. Curiosity. The wind came back then. Slowly at first, then with purpose, moving through the trees with the particular quality of air that has been held still for too long and is only now remembering how to move. The forest exhaled around him. Branches shifted. Somewhere distant, an animal resumed a sound it had apparently been waiting to resume. The world continued. Elias did not. He was never seen again. Not in his town. Not by the scholars he had corresponded with. Not by the one or two people who had known him well enough to notice his absence and spend time they could not fully account for afterwards wondering about it. His desk was found exactly as he had left it. Notebooks stacked neatly. Books open to specific pages, marked with careful annotations in his particular handwriting. A half-finished letter to a colleague in another city that ended mid-sentence, in the middle of a thought about what it means to approach the edge of human understanding and whether, past a certain point, the edge becomes something else entirely. The letter was never finished. But here is the thing that stays. Long after the story ends, long after the forest grows back over the circle of ash and the symbols fade into the earth and the particular events of that night become, for most people, nothing more than local legend, here is what remains. In quiet places, sometimes, people feel it. Not in moments of distress. Not in darkness or danger. But in the particular private stillness that arrives when a person is alone with their own most honest thoughts, when the ordinary noise of daily life drops away and there is nothing left but the mind and its questions. A presence. Not threatening. Not dramatic. Nothing that announces itself or demands to be acknowledged. Just there. Waiting. Patient in the way that only something truly ancient can be patient, with the ease of something that has watched 1,000 years pass the way a river watches seasons change, unmoved, unbothered, knowing with absolute certainty that time only ever moves in one direction. And with it, faint, quiet, almost imperceptible, a question. Not spoken in words. Just felt. How much do you actually want to know? Because the truth that Elias discovered, the truth that cost him everything and that he chose, eyes open, to pay, is not about devils or rituals or forests at midnight. It is older than any of those things. Some doors do not need to be forced. They only need to be found by the right person. And the most dangerous traps in this world are not the ones that look like traps. They are the ones that look like answers. They are the ones that find you in your most honest moments, when you are tired of half-truths and comfortable ignorance and the careful managed distance that most people keep between themselves and the things that truly frighten them, and they offer you exactly the one thing you have never been able to refuse. The next step. The deeper truth. The thing just beyond what is currently known. Elias had spent his life walking toward that thing. He had believed, with everything he was, that reaching it would be a victory. He was right. It was. Just not his. If this story stayed with you, if something in Elias's choice made you feel that particular uncomfortable recognition that comes from seeing yourself in a story you did not expect to see yourself in, subscribe to this channel right now. We tell these stories because some truths only make sense wrapped in darkness. Come back for the next one. It is already waiting for you. And ask yourself honestly, in whatever quiet place you are in right now. What door are you already standing in front of? What question have you been following so long you have forgotten to ask whether following it is safe? And what would you have done, standing in that circle, in the last moment before the light went out, knowing you could leave, knowing the cost of staying, knowing yourself exactly as well as you actually do? Elias knew himself. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point.